In the dim glow of the Oval Office lamp, late on the night of October 22, 1962, President John F. Kennedy stared at a map of Cuba. Reconnaissance photographs lay scattered across the desk, revealing Soviet missile sites under construction, mere miles from Florida's coast. The room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with the weight of decisions no previous president had faced. Advisors filtered in and out, their faces etched with urgency. Yet Kennedy sat alone for stretches, chain-smoking, his mind racing through scenarios that could ignite nuclear war. One wrong signal, one miscalculation, and the world might end. This was not a drill. It was the closest America had come to annihilation. What drove a single man to hold the fate of hundreds of millions in his hands? Why did this presidency, more than any other, teeter on the edge of catastrophe? The Cuban Missile Crisis would test that question in ways no one anticipated. But to understand the peril, we must trace the path that led here, a path marked by charisma, conviction, and a growing undercurrent of risk. The story begins not in Washington, but in the sunlit estates of Massachusetts, where Joseph P. Kennedy, Sr., molded his sons into political warriors. John Fitzgerald Kennedy entered the world on May 29, 1917, the second of 9 children in a family driven by ambition and insulated by wealth. His father, a ruthless businessman turned diplomat, demanded victory above all. Weakness was not an option. Young Jack survived scarlet fever as a toddler, a near-fatal bout that left him frail, his body forever shadowed by illness. Yet he learned early to project strength, to charm, to win. Harvard in the late 1930s sharpened his intellect. Kennedy devoured history, idolizing figures like Winston Churchill, whose defiance in crisis he would later emulate, or so he believed. World War II called him to the Pacific, captaining the PT-109 destroyer. When a Japanese vessel rammed his boat in August 1943, Kennedy swam for hours, towing an injured crewman through shark-infested waters to safety. The heroism was real, the legend burnished. Newspapers hailed him as a hero, but privately he questioned the war's purpose, sensing the fragility of power. Elected to Congress in 1946, Kennedy's rise was swift. He captured a Senate seat in 1952, defying his party's establishment. His book Profiles in Courage, ghostwritten yet Pulitzer-winning, painted him as a man of principle amid pressure. Marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier in 1953 added glamour. She became a symbol of renewal. But beneath the polish lay chronic pain, addictive drugs for his back, a string of affairs that tested his marriage. He compartmentalized ruthlessly, believing he could master personal chaos as he would national crises. By 1960, Kennedy challenged Richard Nixon for the presidency. The campaign was brutal. His Catholicism ignited prejudice. His youth raised doubts. Yet television debates showcased his poise, Nixon's 5 o'clock shadow sealing the narrow victory, fewer than 120,000 votes nationwide. Inauguration Day, January 20, 1961, dawned cold and crisp. "Ask not what your country can do for you," he declared, voice steady, eyes fixed on a horizon of promise. America embraced the torch. What followed was not visible to the public. Kennedy entered office convinced of his singular gifts. He distrusted bureaucracy, sidelining old guard advisors for a cadre of bright young loyalists, the best and brightest. Robert McNamara at Defense, Robert Kennedy as Attorney General, his brother ensuring family control. They shared a faith in rationality, in cool-headed management of complexity. Kennedy saw himself as a chess grandmaster, events as pieces to maneuver. Early days brimmed with optimism. The Peace Corps launched, symbolizing American idealism. The Alliance for Progress funneled aid to Latin America, countering communism's spread. Yet blind spots emerged. Kennedy fixated on image, staging photo ops while real threats simmered. His worldview, forged in elite circles, underestimated populist forces abroad and at home. The first fracture came in April 1961, with the Bay of Pigs. Cuban exiles, trained by the CIA, invaded to topple Fidel Castro. Kennedy inherited the plan from Eisenhower but greenlit it, believing air support would tip the scales. He hesitated on escalation, withholding U.S. jets. By dawn on April 17, Cuban militias crushed the invaders. Over 1,100 prisoners, 114 dead. Humiliation stung. Castro gloated, his revolution entrenched. Publicly, Kennedy shouldered blame. Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. Privately, fury boiled. He confronted CIA Director Allen Dulles. How could I have been so stupid? The debacle exposed his inexperience. He vowed never again to trust intelligence fully, purging Dulles and tightening White House control. But the damage rippled. Castro, spurned, pivoted to Moscow. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev sensed weakness, accelerating arms to Cuba. Only later would the consequences become clear. Kennedy's response hardened resolve, but also recklessness. He escalated rhetoric, calling communism a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy. Advisors noted his thrill for confrontation, a gambler's instinct masked as strategy. In Vienna, June 1961, he met Khrushchev face to face. The Soviet leader bullied, demanding Berlin's neutralization. Kennedy held firm but returned shaken, telling aides, "Now we have a problem." Back home, pressures mounted. Civil rights simmered. Martin Luther King Jr. marched in the South. Kennedy urged restraint, fearing backlash. Economically, recession loomed. Yet he pressed space ambitions, committing to the moon by decade's end. A bold stroke, yet one diverting resources from earthly perils. By mid-1962, the ascent peaked. Kennedy's approval soared past 70%. Charisma masked fractures. He ignored warnings on Vietnam, where advisors urged more troops. "If we let the Asians run our war," he quipped, revealing disdain for on-the-ground realities. Confidence bordered on hubris. He believed personal rapport could sway leaders, events bend to will. What seemed a minor detail in Washington hid gathering storms. U-2 spy planes buzzed Cuba, capturing hints of Soviet buildup. Dismissed as defensive, the activity escalated. Kennedy's habits, late nights, pills for pain, mistresses in the White House pool strained judgment. Isolation grew. Bobby was confident, others expendable. Power expanded while options narrowed. The Berlin Wall rose in August 1961, dividing a city overnight. Kennedy denounced it but refrained from force, fearing wider war. Khrushchev tested further, resuming nuclear tests. Kennedy matched with shelter programs, stoking panic. Fallout shelters dotted backyards, schoolchildren drilled for bombs. Vietnam loomed larger. Advisors like McNamara pushed flexible response, graduated force over all-out war. Kennedy approved more advisors, from 900 to 16,000 by year's end. Generals clamored for invasion. He resisted, yet committed deeper. Publicly, he spoke of withdrawal. Privately, documents showed escalation plans. Contradictions piled. At home, the presidency strained institutions. Kennedy wielded executive power aggressively. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover spied on King, feeding tapes to the White House. Bobby orchestrated wiretaps on Steele executives after a 1962 price hike, accusing them of collusion. Headlines screamed, "Steele crisis." Stocks dipped. Critics decried overreach, the first hints of imperial presidency. External pressures intensified. Khrushchev dispatched ships to Cuba, defying U.S. warnings. "Hands off Cuba," Kennedy had proclaimed in a televised address, September 4, 1962. Intelligence debated intent. Hawks urged airstrikes, Doves negotiation. Kennedy split the difference, opting for surveillance. Internal demons clawed. Adlai Stevenson, UN ambassador, urged caution. Curtis LeMay, Air Force chief, demanded bombing. Kennedy mocked LeMay privately as a warmonger. Stress mounted. Back surgeries loomed. Addison's disease ravaged silently. He leaned on amphetamines prescribed by Dr. Max Jacobson, the Dr. Feelgood. mood swung. Public narrative diverged sharply. Camelot endured, Jackie's White House tour mesmerized, Kennedy's press conferences dazzled. Yet reality fractured. October 14, a U-2 flight returned damning photos, missile erectors, launch pads. The president gathered EXCOMM, his crisis cabal. Debates raged for 7 days. Initial shock yielded fury. He's a madman, Robert Kennedy spat of Castro. Options: invade, bomb, blockade. Invasion risked Soviet retaliation in Berlin or Turkey, where U.S. Jupiters mirrored Cuba's threat. Bombing invited escalation. Blockade, quarantine, emerged as middle ground, announced October 22. The world held breath. Soviet ships approached the line. Khrushchev thundered on radio. Kennedy replied firmly. Back-channel notes flew. A U.S. U-2 strayed over Siberia, shot down, pilot killed. Another crashed in Cuba. Leaks plagued. The New York Times nearly exposed plans. At the time, this seemed insignificant, but a submarine incident nearly ignited war. Soviet B-59 sub, depth-charged by U.S. destroyers, surfaced with a nuclear torpedo armed. Captain Valentin Savitsky, believing war begun, sought permission to fire. Deputy Vasily Arkhipov refused, the lone dissenter. Catastrophe averted by one man's restraint. Pressures collided relentlessly. October 24, ships turned. Relief, but missiles stayed operational. Khrushchev proposed removal for U.S. Turkey pledge, no invasion of Cuba. Secretly, Kennedy agreed to Jupiter pullout. Publicly, triumph. Convergence peaked October 27, Black Saturday. A U-2 was shot down over Cuba. Pilot Rudolph Anderson died. Invasion forces mobilized at sea. EXCOMM fractured. Llewellyn Thompson urged reply to Khrushchev's softer note. Dean Rusk pushed hardline. Robert Kennedy met Soviet Ambassador Dobrynin, promising Turkey missiles gone. Kennedy drafted speeches for every scenario. Blockade, airstrike, invasion. In the Situation Room, graphs tracked warhead yields. One misstep and 100 million dead. Bobby later recalled the dread. We didn't expect to live through it. Irreversible decisions cascaded. Khrushchev blinked first, October 28. Missiles out. Kennedy hailed victory but privately dismantled Jupiters. Casualties, pride, trust. Castro raged at abandonment, souring Havana-Moscow ties. The claim sharpened into focus. This presidency flirted with apocalypse not through madness, but precision, calculated risks that nearly unspooled. Institutions bent. CIA reformed, yet covert ops persisted. Military chafed at restraint, fueling Goldwater's 1964 challenge. Escalation's echo lingered in Vietnam. Post-crisis, Kennedy approved raids on North Vietnam. NSAM 263 hinted withdrawal, but reality pulled opposite. Death in Dallas, November 22, 1963, froze the ledger. Oswald's shots echoed the era's volatility. What remained after the defining period ended? The White House, polished anew under Johnson, bore scars unseen. Kennedy's ratings peaked at 83% post-crisis, yet polls showed nuclear fear at all-time highs. Historians pored over tapes released decades later, EXCOMM recordings revealing chaos beneath poise. Dean Rusk noted the miracle of survival. McNamara later confessed, "We came within a hair's breadth." Judgment split. Admirers hailed steely nerves, the model of crisis leadership. Critics unearthed recklessness. Bay of Pigs invited missiles. Berlin brinkmanship goaded Khrushchev. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., insider chronicler, praised while admitting flaws. Revisionists like Jim Garrison alleged conspiracies tying Cuba to assassination, echoes unproven, yet persistent. Institutions shifted permanently. The crisis birthed the hotline, teletype between Washington and Moscow. Arms control followed. 1963 limited test ban treaty banning atmospheric blasts. Yet dangers proliferated. MIRVs multiplied warheads. Vietnam engulfed the decade. For the man, residue was brief. Kennedy lived 13 more months, pushing civil rights reluctantly. Birmingham's fire hoses forced his hand. June 1963 address pledging equality. Tax cuts spurred growth. Space raced on. Assassination cut reflection short. The office transformed. Johnson's Great Society expanded executive reach. Nixon's tapes echoed Oval secrets. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Iraq, each invoked Kennedy's precedent of audacious power. Long-term consequences shadowed America. Cuba endured, a thorn 90 miles off Florida. Proxy wars defined Cold War's underbelly. Angola, Afghanistan. Nuclear close calls multiplied. Able Archer 1983 nearly fooled Soviets into preemption. History weighs the balance uneasily. Was this the most dangerous presidency? Metrics tempt, 13 days risked all. Truman dropped bombs, Eisenhower coups abroad, Reagan rhetoric chilled. Yet Kennedy's fusion, youthful daring, institutional disdain, personal frailties, uniquely amplified peril. He danced on the brink, believing rhythm his alone. Quiet reflection lingers in Dealey Plaza's echoes, in Havana's defiant billboards, in Moscow archives yellowing with what-ifs. The map on that oval desk folded away reminds, some presidencies flirt with danger. This one embraced it. And in the silence after crisis, the world exhaled, but the tension never fully released. In the shadowed corridors of the Pentagon, months before the missile crisis gripped the world, General Curtis LeMay paced furiously. He had urged immediate strikes on Cuba, convinced that hesitation invited doom. President Kennedy's restraint infuriated him, a young commander-in-chief overruling seasoned warriors. LeMay saw weakness where Kennedy saw strategy. Their clash revealed deeper fissures. A presidency wielding power through intellect, clashing against the raw machinery of military might. What followed was not visible to the public, but it set the stage for risks that rippled far beyond those October days. The Cuban Missile Crisis had passed, missiles crated and shipped back to the Soviet Union under watchful eyes. Khrushchev's gamble failed, his prestige dented at home. Kennedy's image soared, statesman, savior. Newspapers hailed the 13 days that saved the world. Yet beneath the acclaim, fault lines widened. The crisis did not resolve dangers, it multiplied them. Soviet ships had turned, but the submarines beneath carried secrets of near misses. U.S. destroyers had dropped practice depth charges on the B-59, unaware its officers debated launching a nuclear torpedo. One vote against apocalypse. Such fragility defined this administration's edge. Only later would the consequences become clear. Kennedy's victory masked a presidency accelerating toward multiple precipices. Vietnam simmered, no longer peripheral. In late 1961, he had approved the first raids on Laos, covert operations expanding under CIA auspices. NSAM-57 greenlit sabotage against North Vietnam. Advisors like Roger Hilsman pushed for more, framing it as containment. Kennedy nodded, his crisis-honed instincts now applied to jungles half a world away. Publicly, he spoke of peace. Privately, troop levels climbed toward 16,000 advisors by mid-1962. Generals whispered of full commitment. At home, institutions groaned under pressure. The steel crisis of April 1962 exposed the pattern. Executives raised prices days after Kennedy's plea for restraint. He unleashed Robert Kennedy's Justice Department, raids on corporate offices, accusations of conspiracy. Stocks tumbled, executives capitulated. Critics in Congress decried socialism, but Kennedy saw vindication. Executive power flexed unchecked, foreshadowing strains on checks and balances. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI deepened its reach, wiretapping Martin Luther King Jr., labeling him a communist threat. Tapes arrived at the White House, fueling paranoia. Civil rights demands grew, yet Kennedy delayed, fearing electoral backlash in the South. What seemed insignificant at the time, a routine U-2 flight over Cuba in July 1962, nearly reignited flames. Shot down, pilot Major Rudolph Anderson survived, but the incident prompted Castro's plea for more Soviet arms. Khrushchev obliged, missiles included. Kennedy's warnings escalated. A September 4 speech demanding no offensive weapons. Intelligence fractured, some saw defensive SAMs, others the full threat. McNamara downplayed publicly, privately, alarms rang. Power consolidated in the White House. The Tuesday lunches with Bobby and select aides bypassed cabinet, centralizing decisions. McNamara revolutionized the Pentagon with systems analysis, cost-benefit charts for war. Yet hubris crept in. Kennedy dismissed military briefings as outdated, preferring Ivy League whiz kids. LeMay fumed, plotting with hawks. External pressures mounted. Berlin remained flashpoint, with 250,000 U.S. troops facing Soviet divisions. Khrushchev tested the president, resuming atmospheric tests in defiance of a moratorium. Internal isolation deepened. Kennedy's health faltered. Addison's crisis in 1961 nearly killed him, steroids and amphetamines sustaining vigor. Dr. Janet Travell injected Procaine for back pain. Max Jacobson supplied speed cocktails. Mornings began with pills, nights with Marilyn Monroe whispers in nearby hotels. Jackie endured, her own grief mounting after a stillborn son in 1963. Stress manifested in rage. Aides bore tirades over Bay of Pigs fallout. Bobby, ever loyal, insulated him, blurring lines between family and state. Public narrative polished the veneer. The space race thrust forward. John Glenn orbited Earth in Friendship 7, February 1962, tears in mission control. Approval ratings hit 77%, yet divergence grew. Polls showed 60% fearing nuclear war. Fallout shelter sales boomed, children ducked under desks. Kennedy's shelter speech, October 1961, stoked the dread he aimed to quell. Escalation accelerated into 1963. Vietnam tipped. Buddhist protests rocked Saigon. Diem's regime cracked down. Kennedy approved coup planning, via cable to Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge. "We must face the fact the regime may fall," he wired, September 11. Diem died in the chaos, November 1, strangled in an armored car. Kennedy watched newsreels stunned. Stability shattered, Hanoi emboldened. Dominoes teetered elsewhere. Laos neutralized by Geneva, but Pathet Lao advanced. Congo crisis pulled in UN forces. CIA plots against Lumumba lingering in shadows. 007 fever gripped the culture. James Bond films glamorized espionage Kennedy admired. Operation Mongoose ramped up against Castro, exploding cigars, poisoned wetsuits. Assassination attempts numbered 8 by 1963. None succeeded, but recklessness defined the approach. Institutions strained. Congress grumbled at space spending, $5 billion pledged for Apollo. Tax cut battles dragged, deficit hawks resisted. Media probed. The New York Times questioned Bay of Pigs secrecy. Kennedy mused aloud about licensing TV networks, curbing irresponsible coverage. First Amendment bent, not broken. By spring 1963, pressures converged anew. Civil rights exploded. Birmingham's Commissioner Bull Connor unleashed dogs on children. Television images shocked the nation. Kennedy federalized National Guard, drafted a bill. June 11 address. "We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now." Legislation stalled in filibuster-threatened Senate. Vietnam worsened. Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc self-immolated, June 1963, flames consuming protest. Cable traffic surged. Diem must go. Coup executed, generals fumbling into power vacuum. Kennedy agonized in cabinet room, oval table strewn with telegrams. "This is a disaster," he confided to aides. Options narrowed, deeper involvement or withdrawal. NSAM 263 promised 1,000 troops home by Christmas, yet McNamara's trip report urged 15,000 more. Nuclear shadow lengthened. Khrushchev proposed a test ban. Kennedy seized it. July 1963 Moscow talks yielded the limited test ban treaty. Atmosphere, space, underwater clean. Senate ratified 80-19. Triumph, yet underground tests continued, arsenals swelling. Minuteman silos dotted plains, Polaris subs prowled oceans. What followed was not visible to the public. Back channels hummed. Dobrynin met Bobby, trading Cuba no invasion for Turkey Jupiters, dismantled quietly by April 1963. Castro fumed, plotting revenge. FBI files thickened on Oswald, defector to Moscow, back with Soviet wife. Dallas oilmen grumbled at Kennedy's oil depletion allowance cuts. Cuban exiles raged at betrayal. Isolation peaked in the White House residence. Jackie miscarried again. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, born premature, August 1963, died days later. Kennedy retreated to Hyannis Port, grief masked by vigor. Campaign 1964 loomed. Goldwater surged on right, promising victory over communism. Kennedy planned Southern tour, mending fences. Convergence struck November 22, 1963. Dallas streets lined with cheering crowds. Limousine turned onto Elm Street, Texas schoolbook depository looming. Shots rang 3 rapid. Kennedy slumped, blood-staining pink Chanel suit. Parkland Hospital chaos, tracheotomy, heart massage futile. Pronounced dead 1 p.m. Lyndon Johnson sworn aboard Air Force One, Jackie bloodied beside. Panic gripped Washington. Oswald arrested, Patsy cry echoing. Ruby silenced him live on TV November 24. Conspiracy whispers began, CIA, Mafia, Cuba, Soviets. Warren Commission probed. Lone gunman verdict contested ever since. Irreversible consequences accelerated. Johnson escalated Vietnam, Gulf of Tonkin, August 1964, pretexting full war. 58,000 U.S. dead by 1975. Cuba isolated further, embargo entrenched. Nuclear close calls persisted. Soviet sub-K-19 reactor meltdown 1961, nearly irradiated Atlantic. The title's claim crystallized in residue. This presidency, through charisma and crisis flirtation, eroded institutional guardrails. Covert ops normalized. Executive secrecy deepened. Bay of Pigs birthed mongoose excesses. Missile crisis licensed brinkmanship precedents. Reagan's 1983 exercises, nearly sparking war. Historians parsed tapes, declassified memos. Schlesinger's 1,000 Days lionized. Sorensen's memoir burnished myth. Revisionists like Fletcher Nebel in 7 Days in May fictionalized LeMay coups, rooted in real tensions. Oliver Stone's JFK amplified shadows, CIA plots, mafia ties from Chicago bosses angered by lost Cuba casinos. Long-term scars marked the office. Nixon's plumbers, Watergate tapes, Kennedy's secrecy template. Ford pardoned, healing rushed. Carter's malaise echoed post-Vietnam void. Reagan invoked Kennedy's torch, yet Star Wars strained budgets anew. America transformed. Civil Rights Act 1964, Voting Rights 1965, Kennedy's reluctant push bore fruit under Johnson. Space landed Armstrong 1969, moonshot paid. Yet trust eroded. 1964 Gallup showed 42% doubting government truthfulness, rising post-assassination. For the man, legacy ironied. Hyannis grave draws pilgrims, eternal flame flickers. Jackie remarried Onassis, shielding Camelot. Bobby pursued justice, silenced 1968. Ted carried torch, Chappaquiddick dimming. Complications challenged the frame. Kennedy restrained generals, averted immediate wars. Test ban cooled arms race temporarily. Peace Corps inspired generations. Metrics compare. Wilson's Great War entry, FDR's internment, Truman's bombs, each perilous. Yet Kennedy's velocity, youth, health veil, Cold War peak, amplified uniqueness. Institutions flexed near snapping. Quiet reflection settles in Arlington's hilltop view, Washington Monument distant. Crowds thin at night, wind whispers through graves. The oval desk map archived yellows with time. What ifs multiply? No Dallas, Vietnam sidestepped. Cuba opened. The presidency flirted mortality, not just nations. Tension lingers unresolved in history's long shadow. In the half-light of the White House Situation Room, on the afternoon of October 16, 1962, a hush fell over the assembled advisors as grainy U-2 reconnaissance photographs were spread across the table. The images were unmistakable: Soviet medium-range ballistic missile launchers, transporters erecting pads under camouflage nets, just 90 miles from the Florida Keys. President John F. Kennedy studied them intently, his expression unreadable, while Robert McNamara calculated aloud the timelines. Warheads operational within days, capable of reducing Washington to ash in minutes. The weight of that moment pressed down, a single decision away from unleashing Armageddon. No president before had stared into such an abyss. What forces had converged to place this young leader at the helm during America's most perilous hour? Why did Kennedy's presidency, more than any other, expose the fragility of institutions, the razor-thin margin of global stability, and the human capacity for catastrophic misjudgment? The Cuban Missile Crisis would forge the answer in fire, but its origins lay buried in years of ambition, illusion, and accumulating risks that no one fully grasped at the time. The Kennedy Odyssey commenced in the manicured lawns of Brookline, Massachusetts, on May 29, 1917, the second son in a brood of 9 forged by unyielding parental steel. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a self-made financier who parlayed stock pools, bootlegging whispers, and RKO pictures into tens of millions, brooked no mediocrity. Win at any cost, he drilled into his boys during summers at Hyannisport, where Jack learned to sail against Atlantic gales. Childhood frailty struck early. Scarlet fever at 3 left him bedridden for 2 years, his spine curved, intestines ravaged by colitis. Doctors predicted weakness. Instead, he built a facade of endurance, excelling at Choate School despite mocking peers with "The Reason Why" essays that questioned authority. Harvard, from 1936 to 1940, ignited his strategic mind. His thesis dissected Britain's appeasement of Hitler, expanded into Why England Slept, a bestseller warning that hesitation invites aggression. He idolized Churchill's lonely stand, internalizing a creed: strength deters disaster. World War II summoned him to the Pacific as lieutenant junior grade on PT-109. August 2, 1943, off New Georgia. A Japanese destroyer rammed the plywood craft at 40 knots, splitting it amidships. Fuel ignited. 11 men clung to the flaming hulk. Kennedy, back-seared, swam 3 miles through jellyfish and sharks, gripping injured crewman McMahon by the life vest with his teeth. Plum Pudding Island offered no water. He carved rescue messages on coconuts. Life magazine's photos immortalized the saga, but Jack confided doubts to his diary. Wars devour the innocent. Discharged in 1945, he plunged into Massachusetts politics, bankrolled by Joe's $1 million war chest. The 11th Congressional District fell in 1946, a 12,000-vote squeaker against Republican lodger John Lodge. In Washington, freshman Kennedy grilled labor bosses, opposed Truman's Fair Deal, and toured post-war Europe, witnessing Berlin's ruins. Senate 1952 rematch with Henry Cabot Lodge electrified. Jack's 52,000-vote edge bucked Adlai Stevenson's national loss. Yankee polish masked Irish grit. Voters saw vigor. Private battles raged. Back surgeries fused vertebrae with steel plates. Pain gnawed constantly. Cortisone bloated his face. Procaine shots dulled nerves. Affairs dotted his path. Inga Arvad, FBI-flagged Nazi sympathizer. A Miami hotel tryst flagged by Hoover. Jacqueline Bouvier entered 1952, a photographer's daughter whose wit matched his. Their 1953 Newport wedding, 1,300 guests, Vanderbilt estate, cemented dynasty. Yet miscarriages shadowed her. Jack's indiscretions tested vows. Profiles in Courage arrived 1956, profiling defiant senators like Taft and Houston, ghost-aided by Ted Sorensen, Pulitzer crowned amid plagiarism murmurs. It branded him principled, a man above party tempests. 1960 summoned destiny. Primaries honed him. New Hampshire write-in, Wisconsin Catholics, West Virginia Protestants proving faith no bar. Nixon debates, September 26 televised tilt. Kennedy's makeup glow versus Nixon's sweat, swayed 70 million viewers. Election, 34,227,096 to 33,847,385, a 0.17% margin. Chicago precincts reeked of Daily Machine, Texas LBJ delivered. Charges of theft echoed, courts upheld. January 20, 1961, inaugural platform gleamed under gray skies. Let the word go forth that the torch has been passed. Snow melted, multitudes stamped feet in approval. Camelot myth bloomed, Jackie redecorated White House with French antiques, Lawrence ushering opera. What followed was not visible to the public. Kennedy's brain trust, best and brightest, distrusted entrenched bureaucracy. Brother Bobby, 35, Attorney General, McNamara, 44, defense whiz from Ford, Bundy, NSC Wunderkind, 37. Rationality ruled. Crises as equations. We act in the belief that rationality is not bounded, McNamara later reflected. Kennedy sidelined Joint Chiefs, quipping of Curtis LeMay, he looks like a gorilla. Initiatives cascaded. Peace Corps March 1, 1961. Sergeant Shriver recruited idealists for Third World toil. Alliance for Progress, $20 billion Latin aid package, March 13, countering agrarian revolts. Yet cracks spiderwebbed early. Laos collapsed May 1961. Neutrality Pact ignored, Pathet Lao surged. Kennedy approved Maltemes, prelude to quagmire. Bay of Pigs shattered illusions April 17, 1961. Brigade 2506, 1,400 exiles, CIA drilled in Guatemala, hit Playa Girón beaches. B-26s bombed runways. T-33s countered. Kennedy vetoed follow-up strikes, exposing brigade. Militias swarmed Blue Beach. Napalm scorched sands. 114 dead, 1189 captured ransomed for $53 million in food. Castro strutted executing 30. Public mea culpa May 1 cabinet meeting. I should have anticipated. Privately sackings, Dulles, Bissell cable out. Distrust calcified, CIA autonomy gutted, White House micromanaged. Castro, humiliated invader, pivoted Soviet. $100 million annual aid by 1962. Only later would the consequences become clear. Vienna summit June 3–4. Khrushchev menaced over Berlin, 1, 2, 3 war ultimatum. Kennedy stiffened but retreated shaken. Worst thing in my life. He savaged me. Troop call-ups July, $3.2 billion defense hike. Berlin Wall August 13. Barbed wire sundered families. 150 built miles by September. Tank stare-down checkpoint Charlie October. M48s versus T-55s inches apart. Kennedy airlifted 190,000 tons, averting siege. Domestic fissures widened. 1961 recession, 7% unemployment, prompted jobbing. Steel pact April 1962. Kennedy urged restraint. U.S. Steel defied $6 ton hike. Retaliation. Bobby's FBI raided boardrooms April 11. McNamara yanked $1 billion contracts. SOBS, Kennedy raged. Prices rolled back April 14. Dow plunged 2.5%. Business howled Tsarism. Congress probed antitrust excess. Imperial Presidency previewed. Vietnam tendrils tightened. Advisors 685 at takeoff. NSAM 52 January 1962 authorized raids. Taylor mission October 1961. Post Vung Ro Beach landing urged helicopters. 700 by year-end. Outback January 2, 1963. ARVN choppers downed. 400 guerrillas escaped. Deems repression alienated Buddhists. Health's hidden toll mounted. Addison's undiagnosed till 1947. 1960 collapse masked. Travels needling. Jacobson's amphetamine progesterone vitamins boosters. 30 shots 1962. Mood spiked. Judgment veered. Exnergen Kana liaison FBI tracked. Fiddle faddle White House pool romps. Cultural gloss dazzled. Glenn's friendship 7 February 20, 1962. Retrograde reentry peril. Capsule bobbing Atlantic. Kennedy pinned NASA medal March 1. Moon pledge September 12. Before this decade out. Ratings 77% Gallup June. Institutions creaked. Hoover's COINTLPRO tapped King October 1963. Suicide letter, anonymous January 1964. Bobby greenlit. Mongoose November 1961. Lansdale's 32 sabotage schemes. Depilatory pencils, scorpion eggs for Castro wetsuit. 8 mob-aided hits failed. At the time, this seemed insignificant. A U-2 SAM shoot on July 27, 1962, pilot parachuted. Castro begged missiles. Khrushchev shipped stealthily SS-4s, R-12s. Kennedy September 4. No offensive weapons. McNamara testified SAM's defensive. Photos lied. Power accreted, constraints constricted. Tuesday lunches, Bobby, Rusk, McNamara, cabinet bypassed. Civil Defense October 1961. 200,000 public shelters mapped, 18 million private. Tsar Bomba 50 megatons October 30. Shockwaves circled globe thrice. School duck-end cover drills universalized dread. Civil rights fermented. Freedom Rides May 1961 torched Anniston bus. Ole Miss September 1962 Meredith riot. 2 dead, 160 wounded, 30,000 troops. Kennedy televised June 11, 1963. Moral issue. Escalation fused crises. Buddhist crisis May 1963. Quang Duc immolated June 11. Gasoline torrent. Lodge cable August 24. Deem coup tacit OK. November 1 tanks shelled palace. Deem/NHU APC strangled. Kennedy newsreel stunned. Terrible. EXCOMM ignited October 16. IRBMs, MRBMs, 36 Il-28 bombers, 42 cruise Luna missiles. Deliberations taped. Aikson invasion. Stevenson blockade. LeMay 500 sorties then invade. October 22 address. Quarantine imposed. Navy 180 ships ringed Cuba. B-59 October 27 depth charges. Savitsky armed nuke torpedo. Arkhipov Sol-Nay surfaced. Black Saturday, U-2 downed, Anderson dead. SAMs fired 15 more times. Invasion Ortsak fleet sailed, 145,000 mobilized. Dobrynin, Jupiter's out secret for missiles. Khrushchev October 28, remove verify. UN Adlai Stevenson October 25 UN Shubang shamed. Ships unloaded November 20, Jupiter's scrapped April 1964 covert. Convergence shattered precedents. NSAM 273 November 21 hardened Vietnam, no withdrawal. Birmingham May 1963 dogs hoses, bill stalled. Test ban July 25 Moscow, ratified August 24. Dallas November 22, motorcade 1230 Elm Street, depository shots Zapruder 26 seconds, Parkland 1 p.m. dead. Oswald Patsy, Ruby November 24, residue calcified. Gulf Tonkin 1964, 584,000 troops peak. Warren 1964 lone gunman. HSCA 1979 conspiracy probable. Trust cratered 77% 1963 to 36% 1966. Historians tapes 1997, 60 seconds Rusk. Schlesinger hagiography, Hirsch dark side pillage. Comparisons. Truman nukes, FDR camps. Kennedy's fusion brink velocity peerless peril. Quiet in Arlington flames flicker Dealey X marks windswept. Maps yellow, what ifs eternal.